In at number 10, we have the Gacha, and the reason why this creature is here is not necessarily that it's bad, and, you know, in some ways it kind of doesn't deserve to be on this list, but this creature was said to just be, like, a must-have, essentially. Obviously, maybe not quite in recent times, but I still think it deserves to be here, as a lot of people were just saying that this was, like, the best, like, creature on Extinction entirely, without even considering any other creatures. And obviously, it had been nerfed, but still, I do think, although it isn't as apparent now, it still is pretty apparent, and Gacha still exists. I think people do give the Gachas a little bit more attention than there was. Again, not saying they're bad creatures, they are really good, but just nowadays, you don't really need them anymore. Next up, we have got ourselves the Raptor, and this creature, in my opinion, is a really good one, which can be very useful for beginners. But I still think it gets more than it deserves in terms of its press for being a really great creature. Yes, for a beginner tame, it is still very useful, but there are some other great options at that level too, and especially if you're on Genesis Part 2, there are so many options, although on the island you are kind of limited. I'll often skip the Raptor and just wait to get the next best thing up, like a Carno or an Allosaurus or something like that. That will be my first carnivore in the game. And obviously I wouldn't go for a Dialer, and general people wouldn't tame a Dialer, they're not really useful whatsoever, you can't even ride those things. But still, with the Raptor, albeit it is a very useful creature, it's kind of a nerfed version of itself of what it once was, and, you know, albeit, yes, again, useful for beginners, and, you know, it can be quite an easy first carnivore tame. I really think it is overrated, and it doesn't deserve as much as it gets, really. Like, I know Raasclark exists and all of that, so Raptors really are a popular creature in Ark. It's just, for me, maybe not so much. Next up, we have the Rock Drake, and some of you may not be liking my decision here, but in my opinion, I have to say that the Rock Drake is overrated, and the reason for that is the Rock Drake is only very useful in more specific cases because of that gliding ability, and although it is an extremely cool creature with a huge wealth of abilities, it's only really useful on maps like Operation, and I know there are exceptions to the rule and certain biomes which give exceptions to the rule, and certain things which make this creature really great on other maps and in other environments. It's not really that useful on all other maps. You can't just have it being extremely useful in like pretty much every case of air travel, where something like a Snow Owl can do that on any map, obviously apart from maps that exclude flyers, but that's such a low percentage of maps. It's only 2 out of the however many main maps there are, the Island, Scorched Earth, Operation, Extinction, General Engine. Like 2 of the 6, yeah, you might say that's a good third, but still, something like the Snow Owl, it's got a lot more edge over this creature, and this creature actually isn't particularly useful on maps like Fjorda and Ragnarok and all of that. The gliding ability doesn't really suit those maps whatsoever, so that's why I think this creature's overrated. In at number 7, we have got the Allosaurus, and this creature really did have to be here on the list. Like, I could not exclude it. This creature, in my opinion, is heavily overrated, as a creature like a Deinonychus is so much better and frankly easier to tame, and it just excels in every place that the Allo can't. The Allo's a lot bigger and bulkier than the Deinonychus, which actually doesn't really play to its advantage, as the Deinonychus's mobility is significantly better than this. Again, I'm not saying the Allo is a bad creature, I was never really fond of this creature, and I'm still not very fond of it, apart from in SOTF. That's the only real like I have for this creature, and albeit, you know, it's got a cool model and all of that, it doesn't do it for me in terms of a good creature. And something like the Deinonychus or the Shadowmane, I know the Shadowmane's not really part of the exception here, because the Shadowmane is like a really difficult tame, and the Allo is significantly easier than it, and on ASA it's even easier to tame than ever before. It's just, I don't know, really, it lacks in something that the Deinonychus has, and I think people talk about this creature too much, and again, it is a great boss creature and it can do loads of things. I'm not saying that any of the creatures on the list are bad, it's just, for me, it doesn't really need to, it doesn't do what I want it to do. I would prefer a bit more power out of this creature, and, you know, maybe, I'm just trying to really think of something that would make this creature better, and I can't, and it's actually partly annoying with this creature because I want to like it, but I really can't, and I have to put it here. Next up, we have got ourselves the Thyla, and again, this is a really great creature, but people talk about it so much, and I know it's not really on a similar playing field, but the Shadowmane is much better of a creature, but on a similar playing field, I would say the Deinonychus is a better creature, essentially doing everything this thing does, but just better, and it can actually go into boss fights as the Thyla can't. It's a better caving creature because of its size. It has a pack buff, which the Thyla doesn't. It doesn't take full damage, and the Thyla does. And although its like climbing abilities, you could say, are actually better on a Thyla than on the Deinonychus, as you don't really have to jump from place to place, they still pretty much do the same thing. And like, people give the Thyla a lot of press, and I know it is a really great creature for the island, and it will get you very far. Again, I have to keep repeating this because someone usually always says to me, oh, well, this creature's not bad, it's a really good creature. I admit that it's a good creature, it's just, I feel like with new creatures that have come out, although the Deinonychus isn't really new, it just doesn't really deserve its pedestal as much anymore as it once did. If this was like back in 2016, then I would probably think differently, but it's 2024 now, so things change. In at number 5, we have got the Desmodus, and this is actually one of my favourites, but I'm putting it here because although Sanguine Elixir is such an OP thing, and Bloodbag farming is great, it doesn't need to be the best art creature just ever in existence, as creatures like the Deinonychus really do pack a huge punch where the Desmodus can't. And although you can't really have a creature that just does everything, this does a lot of it, but still, I don't think when like people say, oh, the Desmodus is just the best creature in Arc, which I actually have heard quite a significant amount, I'm not going to put it in like the top 3 spots, but I still think it doesn't deserve as much as it gets. It's a really great creature. I do completely admit that. It's just, there are some other creatures out there which, in my opinion, are better than this creature and really don't get as much press as it. Next up, we have the Managama, and this was pretty much the go-to PvP creature for most people, and obviously that has died down now, and it pretty much had died down since the nerf of these creatures. I still hear a lot of really good press about the Managama, and there's nothing strictly wrong with this creature anymore. I will admit it is a little bit overpowered still, especially considering its speed, and it kind of does something which no other creature could. But now creatures like the Astrodelphis and the Tropiognathus, you really don't need this creature anymore. And although, you know, it is cool in its own way and it works and its abilities are actually pretty cool, and the fact that they can freeze creatures is like kind of game breaking, because, you know, you could do that to freeze players and just decimate them. They're not really used as much for that purpose anymore, but I still think they deserve a place on this list, because throughout all of Arc's history, and I know this is most overrated creatures in 2024, you're still going to get a lot of people which, in my opinion, are upselling these creatures for what they actually are. In at number 3, we have got the Pteranodon, and I had to include this thing here, and quite a lot of PT lovers probably won't be too happy with me for that, but I really have to, okay? The Pteranodon, albeit a very useful flyer, and probably most people's first flyer in the game, it's just, it shouldn't be, in my opinion. There are just, you should just wait, really. Unless you're playing on official, then it makes sense. Otherwise, it's not worth it. Like, get a Crystal Wyvern on Crystal Isles, sorry. Get a Crystal Wyvern on Crystal Isles. You can even get a normal Wyvern, although that is a little bit of a stretch. You can get an RG. I know, albeit it is unlocked at a later level. You can get a Maywing on Gen 2. That thing's unlocked at level 19. You can get a Snow Owl and all of that. There are so many creatures. You can even get the Bloodstalker if you have the right map for it. But on maps like the island, I'd probably just wait and get an RG. They are ridiculously easy to tame. And you can tame one of those things and then get a saddle for it relatively quickly from drops. Actually, I've noticed there's been quite a lot of RG saddles in drops, and especially on ASA actually. So if you just go around going through drops to find an RG saddle and then tame yourself an RG, which can be a good level, as you can just trap that thing really simply and easily and then have the strength to knock it out, you can have yourself a really great flyer, and there's not really a need for this thing to be here. I know to regate flyer for those early stages, and there's not all too much competing with it apart from the Maywing, although that is very map limited. I still think it's a little bit overrated. Actually, maybe quite a bit, because it's in the number 3 spot. Controversially, in at number 2, we have the Rhino Ganatha, and the reason why I say that is people are very on the fence about this creature. Some people will just say it's the best thing, and some people will just say it's the worst thing. So I guess actually that's kind of the opposite of on the fence. I'm just going to say people, it's kind of like a Marmite creature. You either love this thing or you hate this thing, and right now I'm quite enjoying the Rhino Ganatha. Not on ASA actually, because they spawn so much and they're really annoying, but just if I actually have one, yeah, really great creature if they're trying to kill me and don't really like them as much. But I still see a different side to this creature, which is like an absolute PvP god, and loads of people are going to really love it for that. But I still think it gets more press than it actually deserves in a way. I know it could pick up Rexes and all of that, but I really think there are some better creatures out there which you can use. And I'm also partly saying this because I think wildcards have made this creature overrated in a way. Like, obviously it was a new creature for the island and it was gonna bring something to the map, but I really think it just brings a lot of imbalance to the island, and the swamp biome is now probably like one of the most dangerous biomes in the game at this point. Like, having these things there, it doesn't feel right to me. And obviously once tamed, yeah, they're really powerful, but still they can be tamed pretty easily if you have the right equipment with barely any effort at all. And you know, people give them a lot of credit, but I guess people give them a bit too much credit because they're definitely nowhere near the pedestal of the best art creatures ever, especially in my opinion actually. But you know, some people might say this is the best art creature and this is the best thing wildcard has ever produced from art, and you can be that person if you want to. I'm not, but people have their own opinions. And in number 1 we have the Rex, and in my opinion this had to be here. Okay, throughout all of Ark's history the Rex has definitely been highly valued, not actually quite as much back in the early days because people saw the Spino for really what it was, which is largely just a better creature than the Rex. Although it does lack in the health department compared to the Rex, it still is pretty much better at everything else. It does more damage, it's got better stamina, it's got better weight. That thing can absolutely rip through the map with its speed, and that's something the Rex lacks. And obviously the Rex is probably the most well-known dinosaur in the world at this point. If someone doesn't know what a T-Rex is, you know, where have they actually been living? Under a rock that's unbreakable in Ark that you can't get out of? Who knows? That was a terrible like version of a joke, but either way, maybe someone found it funny. Comment down below if you found that funny. Was that funny or not? I don't know. Improvisation, I guess. Right. Yeah, the Rex, obviously very popular creature, and it would make sense why people really love this creature, and it is a very good boss creature. I will admit, I've used these things a lot, but still, actually, especially with the new baby taming method, it really just shows you the Rex isn't all too worth it to wildcard in a sense anymore. Like, they don't value it as one of the best. Like, it doesn't really get any kind of TLC, frankly doesn't really need all too much of it, but its tame method is now just one of the simplest in ASA, and it's just so easy to obtain that, you know, it just seems like wildcard don't view this creature as a strong, powerful thing. So it may be some kind of like underrating, but I think the community definitely overrates it a bit for what this thing actually is. First up, we have got ourselves the Quetzal, and this creature in my opinion is one which is extremely underrated, mainly due to its speed, as a lot of people just say, well, it's so slow, I literally can't use this thing. It is the most useless creature out there, and albeit I do admit that its speed is pretty slow for most people's standards, it still is an extremely useful creature for any general task which you may do in any given arc scenario. For PvP players and for PvE players, it works both ways, as you can use these things as great metal gatherers, albeit they don't gather metal, they just transfer metal, so maybe resource transferers. And you can even build a base on the back of this thing as well, which can actually be a pretty OP strat in some PvP situations, although I would probably go with a Raft base over a Quetz base, but definitely for PvE use it is a really cool thing to have, and I don't really get why people don't talk about these things quite as much anymore. Next up, we have got the carb enemies, and most people probably just view this creature as a source of keratin, and albeit it is a great source of keratin, if you need keratin, always kill a carb enemies. That's just the way you go. Keratin's a lot easier to get from insects, by the way, and you generally get a lot more of it, so I wouldn't generally get keratin for things like saddles, but if you want to have keratin, then you can get keratin from these things. But the thing is, with this creature, it is a great window into the underwater world of Ark, and it's the only real underwater able creature that I'm putting on this list. Like, none of the other creatures here are really great underwater creatures, but maybe apart from the next one actually when I'm thinking about it. But this creature is a really great opening creature into, let's say, ocean exploration, because it's reasonably quick in the water, albeit it's not going to be the fastest, and it spawns on land, so you don't need to go into the ocean, albeit an ichthyosaurus can be obtained pretty easily these days, and you know, across all time really, but there's loads of traps if you want to do that for an ichthyosaurus. Not really strictly necessary, but they spawn in shallow areas and you can get those. But having a carb in the early stages to get some of that oil gathered in the early stages just really seems to help me out. Next up, we have the Beelzebufo, and this creature has to be here. Come on, the king of cementing paste gathering, and albeit some of you may just say, well, this isn't an underrated creature at all, and it's like the best creature for me pretty much because I can get so much cementing paste with it. A lot of people don't use it, and I used to be one of those people a couple of months ago, and I've switched to this thing now, and I really can't go back. Like, it's so consistent in the way it gathers any kind of cementing paste. There's only really one kind, but you can technically say there's many because there's loads of different ways of getting it. I would usually get it from beaver dams, and quite a lot of Ark players do. It's just really easy, and you could obviously craft it as well, but that is quite slow. Whereas with this thing, you can just kill loads of insects, go into the insect cave on the island, and boom, you can have tens of thousands of cementing paste, and you might actually be encumbered because of all of that. But either way, you can just get so much with this thing. It really has to be on this list, and it is also a pretty good underwater creature as well. You know, it really does have quite a lot of agility underwater, albeit doesn't pack the most amount of damage. It still is extremely useful, especially in ASA actually now, as insects no longer have levels. In at number 7, we have the Baryonyx, and this creature had to be here in my opinion, and a lot of people are actually moving over to creatures like the Shadowmen now for all of their caving needs, but I really do think the Baryonyx deserves a place on the list, and actually deserves a place in everyone's Ark life for being a great caving creatures, albeit the Shadowmen can do a hell of a lot more than the Baryonyx in quite a lot of aspects. The Baryonyx can also do a couple of things which, you know, the Shadowmen can't. The first main advantage actually to this thing is its taming method is so much easier, and you can obviously, because of that, get it much earlier in the game, and also it can stun creatures underwater as well. Albeit, yeah, not the biggest edge over the Shadowmen, I still think it really has a very useful place as a very great caving creature, and I've used these things for years and years now, and albeit, yes, Shadowmen are great for doing cave runs, I still always come back to this creature. It's just the general basics for me. I know how to use this creature really well and effectively, and I don't really think that I need anything more than a Baryonyx. And albeit a Shadowman can be very useful and all, but if I think that you don't really need anything more than the Baryonyx, then maybe do you actually need more than the Baryonyx? And this thing is very easily possible. Not to say that it's a bad creature, it's like, oh, well, you don't really need anything more than it. It is still a very great creature, it's just, it's much easier to get your hands on. Next up, we have got the Dimorphodon, and this is a very brief entry, obviously, because the BR for this thing is really short, because there's not too much to say, but they're just really great small pack flying creatures, and they could deal a heck of a lot of damage, especially to players, as they do player-based damage instead of rider-based damage, which can play a huge advantage in a lot of scenarios. And I think people don't give this creature enough credit, and that's why it's on this list. And next up, in the number 5 spot, of course, we have the Carnotaurus. And most people will just be like, well, the Aloe's better. There's nothing more to say. But we're talking about underrated creatures here, and obviously the Aloe isn't really too much of an underrated creature. Yeah, the Rex gets a lot more attention than it, and the Giga gets a lot more attention than the Aloe. But I think the Carno gets even less attention, and especially less attention than this creature actually deserves, as this pretty much my favorite art creature. But I'm not going to be so biased and just put my favorite art creature right then in number 1 spot, because there are a lot of other art creatures which are extremely useful to me, and this is, yes, albeit my favorite, it's still, in my opinion, doesn't deserve to be in the number 1 spot, as there are some more useful underrated creatures, and my personal and emotional bias, I'm not going to play a huge factor into this video, because, you know, I'm making this for you, I'm not making it for me. If I was making it for me, they'd kind of be right in the number 1 spot, but I'm making it for you, so I'm slightly generalising my list here. The reason why I think the Carno is so good, I don't know why it's taken me so long, I've just blabbered on about everything. It deals the bleed ability, it's relatively small compared to things like the Aloe, it does a sizable amount of damage, it's got a good health stat, and it's got good mobility. And albeit its weight isn't perfect, it could definitely be a little bit higher, still is really an ideal creature for me. When I think of a carnivore, I go straight to the Carno, and they're ridiculously easy to tame too, especially in ASA, because you can just kill the parents and then press E on that baby, if obviously there's a baby relative to the parents of the Carnotauruses. Next up, we have got the Megalosaurus, and loads of people really like this creature, and I've heard them in my comments. But when I think of bigger ARC YouTubers and when they do their top 10s, I never really hear this creature being mentioned, unless maybe in an aberration circumstance, and albeit they're really useful then, the nighttime still makes up quite a big proportion of your ARC playtime, especially if you're on Operation, then it's 100% of it. But we're not going to be talking about how great this thing is in Operation, because that's pretty much when this creature gets brought up, all everyone talks about. No, on any map, as soon as it turns into nightfall, this creature is so deadly, and it really does pack a punch, and it can even carry creatures around in its mouth and absolutely tear them to shreds. It actually saved me from a huge clan of Microraptors, if that's even a thing. But yeah, they really do pack a punch in terms of the damage department. They will tear things like the Carno to shreds, even things like Rexes and Alphas and all of that. They can just take out with so much ease, and they're such a small, like, versatile carnivore. It really does help them that they have all of this power behind it, as they're very mobile, very easy to use, very easy to control, and actually, frankly, pretty easy to control. Tame, that's what I meant. Did I something. Either way, they're pretty much easy in every aspect. Not as actually so easy to tame in the location they're in, but the actual taming method is very simple. I've kind of gone a bit off here, but you know, it's essentially the Troodon on loads of steroids, and it's so much easier to tame than a Troodon. If the Troodon would never make this list, of course, but yeah, the Megalosaurus is in at number 4. Next up, we have the Velonosaur, and for me, this is just the upgraded Megalosaurus. It deals tons of damage, it can deal range damage, and it's around for all the day. It doesn't just need to be around at night time, albeit the Megalosaurus definitely has its place on this list. The Velonosaur is my preferred creature. And, you know, some people may not agree with that. Do you agree with that? Are you a Velonosaur or a Megalosaurus person? Or a Carnotaurus person? Or a Baryonyx person? Or what's your preferred kind of small carnivore? I know I've done many small carnivore top 10 lists before, but I actually want to know what your favourite small carnivores are. So make sure to comment that down below. And, you know, when I think of the Velonosaur, I really do think of sheer power. And albeit when you level up its melee, its actual turrets don't increase in damage. If you just crank that stamina stat like I just did there, you can fire these things for ages into creatures and just absolutely decimate them. And I had a ridiculously high level theory here. It was in the 1000 somethings, and I didn't force tame a particularly high level Velonosaur, so it is kind of looking like it takes ages in this scenario. And obviously you wouldn't use them at this close of a range, but when you have a good level Velonosaur, you really can take out creatures like it's an FPS game, just straight like that, and that's why I absolutely love this creature. Now, the Crystal Wyvern has to be here on the list, and loads of people talk about the Wyvern just being so great and all that, and yes, I do think the Wyvern is a great creature. I just don't think it gets no, what am I thinking of? The Crystal Wyvern, sorry, doesn't get a good enough rep as it should, and the normal Wyverns get the reputation that the Crystal Wyverns should be getting as well, as they are kind of the same creature. It's just they don't come in the Wyvern trenches, and they've got another word in front of their name, so they must be worse variants of these creatures, which obviously are the Wyverns, which you'll know from Scorched Earth, as that's the map they released on. But they're far easier to tame than normal Wyverns, and the Blood Crystal Wyvern is my absolute favourite Wyvern. And the Lightning Wyvern doesn't even come close to the coolness and usefulness of the ability which you can get out of a Blood Crystal Wyvern. And again, I know I'm saying it again, they're so easy to tame. You just need to be level 65 and have been able to either knock out or kill Crystal Wyvern. I think it's knockout. And then you've got that Primal Crystal, and then you can simply just passive tame these things, and boom, like that, you have yourself a Wyvern. And albeit there's no saddles, so they have no armor, but normal Wyverns don't have that either. I really do think these creatures do deserve some consideration in a list of the most underrated creatures in 2024, as hardly anyone seems to talk about these things. And in at number 1, we have got the Bloodstalker, and I had to put this creature here, okay? I really like the Bloodstalker at the moment, and albeit, yes, you can maybe say it isn't the most underrated creature, but for the use that I use it for, I do think it is underrated, and that's why I've chucked it right in the number 1 spot. And as soon as I thought of making this video, this was the first creature that came to mind for me, so I was like, I have to put this thing in at the number 1 spot. It is the greatest water tame, in my opinion, with no comparison whatsoever. And yes, it doesn't have immunity to things like electric eels and jellyfish, but it's so quick, it can get out of there, like, you don't even have to think about it. It's just, it's so agile in the water, it can skim across the top of the water as well, and even if they do get you, it's not going to be the biggest issue. You can get yourself out of there, or you can handily deal the damage to take them all out as well. And they're not just useful in the water like most normal water creatures, which obviously just die if they're not in the water. No, these things can be taken out anywhere and used in all kinds of various situations that aren't in the water as well. And that's what makes this creature so good. And they're just so versatile, but mainly for underwater exploration, underwater travel, and just general underwater things. These are my preferred creature, and they're so good. Underwater caving, underwater getting into underwater bosses. I wouldn't actually bring them into the mode of boss fight. They're not really going to survive there. They're not boss fighting creatures, but for anything that you're already doing underwater apart from the mode of boss fight, these things are really your perfect creatures, and I don't get why people don't talk about these things being such great underwater creatures as much as I do. But anyway, that is the end of today's video, and I really hope that you all enjoyed this one. And as always, comment down below what is the most underrated art creature in 2024, as I want to know your thoughts, and do you agree with this list? And with that, I'll see you all later.